Now, as I've referenced a couple of videos already, this offensive line class is not really good. That's why you won't see a ton of scouting reports about the offensive linemen because the class is not very good, and I don't have a ton of interest, frankly, in studying them. It's that simple. And I wonder if scouts share the same opinion, some of the front office executives share the same opinion. But at the end of the day, you never know. Some you could find some diamonds in the rough. Some guys could really vastly outplay their draft position. Odds are that probably happens. But just in general, this is not a good class. And, again, as I mentioned when referencing Garrett Bowles, teams are going to be looking at guys that could potentially play on the blind side and, perhaps even overdrafting them compared to where they're actually graded because you could sit there and say, hey, I could take this guy's in the 20s of the first round. I've got him graded as an early to mid second rounder, but man, the departure from left tackle 3 to left tackle 4 is such a gaping void that it's too significant of a drop off of talent for me to fuck around and wait to take one. So you'll have some guys, in my opinion, in this offensive line class, one in particular in Ryan Ramczyk, who, for my money, shouldn't be a first round pick, but could possibly be because teams will fall in love with certain traits and certain characteristics and certain aspects. They'll also have some concerns about the fact they need to address the position and the talent after the top few guys really drops off quite significantly. But when you talk about Ryan and who he was, this is a kid that came from UW Stevens Point, transferred to Wisconsin, and really, in a way made a name for himself in the course of really, frankly, one season. It is interesting that a guy could go from Stevens Point to being a starter on one of the consistently better offensive line units in college football in Wisconsin. Now, this is not a guy that you're saying, well, he was always a Division III type of talent. No, he originally had committed to a Division One school, but then he didn't want to go there, and then he took some time away from football and then came back to it. But when you watch Ryan Ramczyk on film, you can see some of the appeal. He's got decent size, not great size, but he's 6'6", 310 pounds. He's big enough to play offensive line at the NFL level. He's big enough and long enough, um, sort of, to play offensive tackle at the NFL level. He's got adequate strength, not exceptional strength, but enough functional strength to be able to get by where you hope that you get him into an NFL strength and conditioning program and he will get stronger. He's an outstanding run blocker. He's one of the best run blockers in this draft. I don't think there's any question about that. Frankly, when it comes to the run blocking aspect, you would expect a guy coming from Wisconsin, a team that prides itself on its old school kind of power running football offensive game plan, to be proficient as a run blocker. And Ryan most certainly is. He's really good at getting into the second level. He's tremendous, in my opinion, at the seal block. He doesn't pancake a ton of people, but he can really put defenders on their heels in the running game, especially when he gets to the second level. He's just a consistently strong run blocker, and it'll be a real asset and will help him get by early at the NFL level as he improves in other areas of his game. His pass blocking is good. I don't think it's great. I think it's good. He does have the lateral athleticism, it would appear, to be able to stay outside at the NFL level. At times, you saw a guy who, even if he got beat initially off the edge, was able to recover before he allowed the edge rusher to bend the edge on a consistent basis. Um, but he has some issues in terms of his hand usage, in terms of his leverage. He definitely is raw, and you could see that. He looks like a guy that only played 1 year at Wisconsin and then is coming into the NFL draft. And that will hurt him sometimes in his pass protection. He doesn't anchor very well, so he can get bull rushed. He can be put back a little bit. Sometimes as well, on top of hand usage that needs to be more violent, with more purpose, and better in terms of the technique and keeping his pad level low, which in part could come from getting stronger. You just look at him, and sometimes he's just kind of going through the motions is the best way I can really describe it. He's a guy that athletically you look at him and you're like, I don't know if he could dominate, but he should be better than he is. But it just seemed like to me too often, and you especially saw this in pass protection. This is where it really stands out. You saw a guy that would sit there and kind of like casually go through his slide step. And then as the edge rusher is already drawn even with him, if he's not already trying to bend the edge, that's when Ramczyk tries to recover and seal off the edge and keep his quarterback upright. And maybe you can get away with that kind of laissez-faire half-assing at the college level. You're not going to be able to do that at the NFL level. And even in that case, when you talk about the athleticism, he has good athleticism. Frankly, I don't think he has great athleticism. Um, he's got quick feet in a short burst in terms of his protection, his pass protection. But his athleticism in space, really honestly, is not all that great. He shows some lateral agility to recover on the edge, but again, that's going up against largely Big Ten edge rushers. What happens when you go up against NFL edge rushers? Are you going to really show that you don't have the athleticism that people think? I think his awareness and instincts are solid for the position, but not great. Like I said, one of the things that bothered me about him is that he was inconsistent in terms of his effort and his motor. At times, I felt like he was a play hard, try hard type of guy. At times, he would fight. But like I mentioned before, he could get a little lazy in pass protection. And as much as you love to talk about blockers that block to and through the whistle sometimes and play with a bit of a chip on their shoulder, a bit of a red ass, he can play lazy at times. Sometimes his desire to go mix it up as a run blocker isn't all that it needs to be. And in particular in pass protection, like I said, it seems like at times he's just comfortable enough with doing just enough to get by. And that shit's not going to fly at the NFL level. Furthermore, you talk about a kid coming off of hip surgery, so he wasn't able to work out at the combine. He only has 1 year of D1 starting experience at Wisconsin, and it shows in his game in terms of some of his technique and how raw he is. There are also some concerns that come about with his love of football. And, sometimes you'll hear about this and you'll be like, well, why wouldn't the guy want to play if he went through Pee Wee, he went through middle school, high school, and college? Why would he all of a sudden want to stop playing? But this is a kid that instead of going to a Division I program coming out of high school, he ultimately decided to do something else for a period of time and stepped away from the game of football. That does make you question just how much he truly loves the game. Furthermore, at times, like I said, in particular with his inconsistent and sometimes lackluster effort, it makes you again question his love of the game. This is something that matters to scouting departments in the NFL. This is something that matters to GMs and front office executives because, especially in recent years, you've had these guys like the Chris Borland's in the world of so on that you've drafted and they've played well, but then all of a sudden 3-4 years, or in Borland's case 1 year in for whatever reason, long-term health, what have you, they will sit there and they will retire. So does a team want to risk taking a guy like Ramczyk in the first round, thinking that there's a possibility that in 2 or 3 years he's not going to work hard at his craft and he's going to say, I've kind of had enough of this. I ripped you off for a little bit of money and now I'm going to go do something else with my life. I think it's a valid concern, and I think it becomes a more important concern as there's an increased emphasis and focus on long-term health of players and some of the rash of early retirements that we've seen in recent years. I think it's a more valid question to ask than it was maybe a few years ago. And I think it is going to be asked, and it's something that's going to have to be addressed. In general, I look at Ramczyk, and I think his draft stock is anywhere between 20 and maybe 35 in this draft. I think there's a chance he could slide out of round 1. Frankly, he shouldn't be a first-round pick based off of talent, based off of where he is in his game. But also knowing, again, like I referenced at the beginning of this video, the lack of talent and depth in this offensive line class, in particular at the tackle position, and guys that could legitimately, especially have enough athleticism to be able to play left tackle at the NFL level. You look at a guy like Ramczyk, and you figure that he will benefit from the weak, lackluster offensive line class. He really would have benefited from a pure football standpoint going back to school. But in this particular case, I cannot knock him for declaring because he chose a good time to. Because even though I don't think he's in the same class quite as a Garrett Bowles, let alone a Cam Robinson or Forrest Lamp, excuse me. I did it again. I always do that. I don't know why. Ramczyk's not that far off from Bowles, and he's a little bit younger. But there is a little bit of a difference. But I think in part, again, he's going to get artificially propped up in the draft process because of the lack of talent in the class. So it wouldn't surprise me if he did make it to day 2. But if he did, he's not going to last very long. It also would not surprise me if he got taken in the tail end portion around number 1, anywhere from Denver, Houston on, 20 to 25 and anywhere after. Seattle, a couple other teams in the mix, because they look at him and they say he's one of the few guys in this class that can potentially play left tackle at the NFL level. And that's true. He's one of the few that I think actually can. But for my money, I graded him as an 85.0. I compare him to Eric Fisher, who, when he was coming out of Central Michigan, he ended up being the #1 overall pick in the 2013 draft. He's gotten paid a lot of money, but that doesn't mean he's very good. Honestly, a guy that, part of the argument that even I made for taking him over a Jokel back in 2013 was that I thought he was superior athletically, and he is, but it doesn't mean he's very good. And that's the truth of the matter. You just look at him and you're like, when you watch Ramczyk, I see a guy that could play at the NFL level. I just wonder how bad he really wants to play and play well at the NFL level.